Chapter 6. Southern Hospitality. 5 long days on the road had passed. We traveled over mountains pocketed with poverty-stricken coal mining towns. As the days disappeared behind us, so did the poor mining towns of West Virginia. Slowly, the extravagant plantations of the South emerged. Every mile was a grind on that last day of travel. William and Mr. Wilcox rambled on about religion like two blatherskites, while Everett and I bounced around the back of the buckboard wagon. The chest cold that seemed to be toying with Everett since our arrival in the States was getting worse. The uncovered wagon offered us no protection from the chilling rain we were occasionally showered with, each drop of rain seeming to erode Everett's health right in front of us. All the blankets we had could not stop the chill and fever from festering inside him. We feared pneumonia, but had no other choice but to ride on, deep into Virginia, where we followed the St. James River toward Richmond. The depth of Richmond's elegance and wealth was more than the imagination can fathom. Uniform rows of trees lined private drives to red brick mansions that had white pillared porches fit for a king's palace. Fellow travelers on the road would pass by, and William would ask if they were familiar with the McFarlands, until one man on horseback stopped and said, "Why, yes, I am Augustus McFarland. What can I do for you gentlemen?" I was shocked we ran into a McFarland, but William's face said it all. Before any words left William, Augustus figured it out himself. "You must be the Canadian Confederates that Uncle Jack has sent us," he said. "My father's been anxiously awaiting your arrival." Kind old Mr. Wilcox immediately joined in. "What's the word on their sick cousin?" From his horse, Augustus looked down and sized us up, focusing his stare on Everett before turning back to Mr. Wilcox. "I will have to send for a doctor to give you word on his condition," he said. "The house is just a mile up the road. Follow me there, and we can be formally introduced at the house." Traveling behind McFarland, we were shown where his property began, from the split-rail fence that ran along the road to the rolling hills of cotton and tobacco reaching for the hot sun. Mr. Wilcox turned to William. "In all honesty, you have no sick cousin," he said, wised up now and looking bitter. "I don't believe you have any cousin here at all." William knew his lie was by now transparent. "We are here to be Confederate soldiers. It was a wretched deal to keep our land due to debt. That's all. It would have been a long walk without your ride, and I'm grateful for it." Mr. Wilcox pulled on Princess's reins, halting the wagon. He was restraining his temper, veins protruding from his throbbing temple. With an angry, authoritative voice I had not heard before, he demanded that we get out of his wagon. William tried reasoning with him, but Mr. Wilcox merely said, "You have your reasons and I have mine. Now out of my wagon." "What's the meaning of this?" said Augustus, turning his horse around upon noticing our row. Mr. Wilcox replied with only one word, "Deception." And with that, we were all unloaded from his wagon. A quick crack of the reins on Princess's back and he was gone, riding away without looking back. Poor Everett was not fit for a wagon ride, let alone walking, however short the distance may be. Augustus dismounted and offered his horse to Everett while the three of us walked the rest of the way. Once mounted, Everett looked more fitting for falling off than riding. Augustus proceeded to take the reins from Everett's hands and began to lead the animal while William and I walked alongside. For a while, there was just the sound of the horse's hooves in our feet, until Augustus inevitably asked, "Who was that old man? What happened?" "That was Mr. Wilcox," replied William, adding, "a Quaker. We met on the train in Ohio. He is an outspoken Unionist. Rather than tell him our true purpose of coming here, I told him we were traveling to visit a sick cousin. My fib could no longer be sustained when we ran into you." "Old Nimrod," he chuckled to himself, apparently finding all this quite funny. William did not find the same humor in the matter. He had grown to like Mr. Wilcox. I knew he was upset that they parted on such bad terms. The private road with its old oak trees aligning both sides and the cotton fields beyond, spanning into the distance, were impressive. But nothing was comparable to the magnificent grandeur of the McFarland plantation home. Red brick, 3 stories high, with a slate mansard roof from which ornate white windows projected. The white accents mirrored the white pillared porch that spanned the front of the house and greeted the driveway with nothing short of elegance. A man in a 3-piece suit was sitting in a rocking chair, smoking a cigar. The gentleman had the same mannerisms as Jack McFarlane we had known back in Canada. It was easy to see they were brothers. The old man stood up from his rocker and leaned against one of the pillars, puffing casually on his cigar as we approached the porch. "I thought you were attending business in New Canton," he shouted to Augustus, his cigar still in his mouth. Augustus smirked, that unpleasant, sinister twitch in the corner of his mouth I would come to know well before long. "Yes, father, I was. But look what I stumbled into on the road. Our 3 Confederates. New Canton can wait." Old McFarlane made his way down a few steps from the porch. We were introduced to Augustus's father, John McFarlane. As we were doing our introductions, a woman in a luxurious dress came out of the house. Augustus's mother and mistress of the house, Mrs. Mary McFarland. "Is the man on the horse injured?" she said with concern in her voice. "Thank you kindly, ma'am. I've come down with a cough, ma'am. It's been a long trip for us. The name's Everett, ma'am." Before Everett's finished, Mrs. McFarlane called out, "Savannah! Savannah!" And from the house, Savannah quickly emerged. "Savannah," the mistress said, to the heavy-set black woman, "the man on the horse is ill. I want you to put him up in one of the guest rooms. Fix him whatever he would like to eat and set him up with a hot bath." Old McFarlane looked at his wife with dismay. "My dear, these 3 men have a duty to attend to." "This man doesn't look fit for duty," Mrs. McFarlane replied vigorously. "Let us not be responsible for sending sick men to the war. Until Mr. Everett here is feeling well again, he is our guest, and his brothers as well." With Mrs. McFarlane's word, the matter was settled. It was easy to see who actually ran the house. Everett, Mrs. McFarlane, Augustus, and Savannah all disappeared into the house, leaving William and myself with John. We stood there, anticipating an invitation inside, or conversation, or any form of acknowledgement of our existence. But John McFarlane merely returned to his rocking chair and gazed out onto his vast property. William later told me that he did this to show his power, to make us feel inferior. In any case, it was clear that we were unwanted guests. After a few minutes of holding our bags, standing in the heat, William, exhausted and exasperated, defiantly asked, "Would you rather that we go back to Canada?" McFarlane's smug face indicated yes. Instead, he replied, "No, why no. I was thinking. When you get to my age, you need a few moments in the day to think." He stood up from his rocker, poked his head inside, and called for Savannah. She quickly appeared again. "Show these gentlemen to the guest rooms," he instructed without looking at any of us. We passed through the front door, my eyes adjusting from the light outside. My vision slowly came into focus. Before us was the splendor of the McFarland home. All combined wealth I had seen in Canada could not be compared to this place. Knee-high baseboards that transitioned into raised panels, vibrant wallpaper with gold leaf designs, ornate plasterwork at the top of the wall carried on through the ceilings. And then more gold leaf. I paused in astonishment. Savannah and William continued up one of the 2 staircases, not noticing I lagged behind. A large statue of a woman caught my eye. She stood as tall as myself. Her arms were missing, her breasts were exposed, and what was left of a toga fell around her waist. In her battered shape, she was out of place in this opulent home. It was Augustus McFarlane's voice that brought me out of my trance. "Admiring Venus, are we? My father brought her back from Europe some years ago. He has a weakness for the ancient Roman antiquities. You'll know when you see more of the house. Mother hates this particular piece. I'm sure if Venus was lighter, she'd be thrown out of the window." "Never have I seen anything like her," I said in a whisper. "She's chiseled from a solid piece of marble and 1,500 years old. I doubt you're likely to ever see anything like her again unless you go to Rome. Now, let me show you to your room." I gazed at her for a few last seconds and followed him upstairs. The room I was given on the 3rd floor was not extraordinary as the lower halls and other rooms of the mansion, but still charming with a certain quaintness. The outer wall pitched inward to contour the mansard roof outside. A single window protruded the wall with an upholstered love seat built under it. It offered a bird's-eye view of the back of the house and into the fields where a small regiment of slaves labored under armed and mounted guards. I laid in bed for an overdue nap, but was soon awakened by a bell from outside the window. It was the slaves' dinner bell, summoning them back from the fields to eat. From above, I watched the exhausted men, women, and children make their way from the fields to their slave huts for food. Then, with a gentle knock on my bedroom door, Savannah also gave me a dinner call. I had 2 shirts to choose from, so I chose the better of the 2, which was only worn for 3 days since it was last washed. The mansion was cavernous. It was almost necessary to carry a map to navigate the halls. The clanking of glasses, though, helped guide my way. In the dining room, I found both of the McFarland men and William by the fireplace, drinking brandy, while a full set of dinner service with the finest silverware and crystal awaited. William and I looked like peasants next to the McFarlands, who were dressed better than us on an Easter morning. I was envious of Augustus's nicely tailored suit, pressed shirt, and checkered vest, luxuries I have never known. I was envious of his demeanor and looks, too. He was more masculine and taller than myself, with clean, well-groomed blonde hair combed off to one side, which complemented his facial features, strong jawline, soft blue eyes, and a nose with a smooth profile that slightly tilted up at the end. I was envious that he was born into a privileged family with prominence and power. I tried to control my jealousy, however, for William had taught me that jealousy was a terrible trait. Vases on stands, paintings lining the walls, ornaments and collectibles neatly placed on shelves pulled my attention away from the mumble of gentlemanly conversation by the fireplace. I found myself wandering around the dining room and examining the endless collection of treasures in complete fascination. "Logan, don't be rude, join us." It was William's voice. The 3 men had been watching me touring the room. Something seemed to amuse John McFarland when he said, "No, by all means continue. Someone in the house should appreciate my collection." "What part of the world did you find this in?" I asked, pointing to a curious object, a harp made of wood and delicate strings. I had seen it in books before. I had no idea it was as tall as a man. Its highly polished varnish and overly intricate carvings showed attention to every detail by the craftsman that constructed it, a fine example of functional art at its best. The fact that it had the potential of producing music infatuated me all the more. "Now that is the one thing in the room that doesn't belong to Father," Augustus McFarland said. I wanted to touch its strings, but restrained myself. "I've never heard one. Can you play it for me?" Augustus chuckled. "Heavens! No, the harp is a woman's instrument. I gave it to my fiancée, Elizabeth, as an engagement present. I am sure she would be happy to play it for us after dinner. I warn you, though, it's not as impressive as one might think. To me, it's uninspiring noise." "In my head, I have always imagined the harp being played by angels," I said jokingly. Augustus smirked. "Well, don't say that to Elizabeth. A praise like that would go right to her head." The McFarlands laughed together, and both stopped abruptly when Mrs. McFarland entered the room. By her side was an absolute beauty. Her golden hair slowly waved down her cheek, framing her large, round, endearing baby blue eyes, perfectly placed to complement all of her lovely feminine features. The flaxen hair then progressively transitioned into curls that came to rest by her breasts. She enthralled my senses. Suddenly, no art collection could divert my attention away from her. Augustus McFarland's words broke my trance. "Gentlemen, may I present my fiancée, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, this is Mr. William and Logan." I was shamelessly jealous. He was engaged to a true angel of this world. "Let's not keep dinner waiting," said old McFarland. With flawless chivalry, father and son then sat the 2 ladies at the table. William and I waited for everyone to be seated before finding our own. John McFarland and his wife were at either end of the table. Augustus and his beautiful fiancée Elizabeth were across from William and me, and Elizabeth facing me directly. My eyes hopelessly drifted in her direction. As her head lifted, I tried to look away, but all was useless. My infatuation had gotten the better of me. She returned my gaze with equal intensity. As her gorgeous, glossy blue eyes fearlessly met mine, my blood went cold as my heart began to race. Instantly growing shy and nervous, I looked away without a word spoken. "My dear, our guests have never heard a harp played. Would you honor us with a demonstration after dinner?" said Augustus. Elizabeth replied, "Of course, I would be happy to." Savannah and the two other house slaves began to serve us salad and soup. Unaccustomed to the formal table etiquette, I discreetly looked around to follow someone's lead. Before me was an excessive selection of utensils, 3 forks, 2 spoons, and 2 knives. I cautiously proceeded to eat by copying the selection of silverware others had made around the table, so I wouldn't appear foolish. I was enjoying the wonderful juicy steak with potatoes and corn when John McFarland announced to William and me that the minute Everett was well again, we would join up with the Army of Northern Virginia. "I apologize," replied William, "but I'm not really familiar with the Army of Northern Virginia." Everyone smiled, and the McFarland men chuckled, as if William had just told a joke. When his blank face declared all seriousness, the laughter stopped. "General Lee has the ability to take Washington, and he would have done so already if we had not lost Stonewall at Chancellorsville," said John McFarland. All the table agreed with a mumble or a nod, except for William. The temptation for debate was too strong for him to sit silent even in this circumstance, and he asked, "If Lee is so capable, why hasn't Washington fallen yet? Is he just biding his time while thousands of lives are sacrificed until he decides to just walk into Washington and put an end to the war?" "That tone of voice is not welcome at my table," said John McFarland sternly. He sipped his wine and continued with a slower, calmer voice. "The only thing at this point that is holding Lee back is the lack of material and men. He has crushed all Union armies and every General Lincoln can throw at him, time and time again. Lee has fought victories against insurmountable odds. That alone proves God's will in the Confederacy." There was a moment of awkward silence before William retorted, "From the newspapers I've read, God wasn't present at Vicksburg. How do you explain the recent loss at Gettysburg? The hardship we endure is God's way of testing our faith. The Revolutionary War was fought for independence and many sacrifices were made. Why should this war be any different? This fight will be won by a victorious South. That is undeniable." Before the conversation escalated into an argument, I spoke up, trying to change the subject. "In Ohio, our train was intercepted by Confederate cavalry. Thinking we were spies, they wanted to shoot William and Everett. General Morgan asked me to vouch for them, and I did. It was quite an exciting experience." That captured the McFarland's interests. "You met General Morgan? That far north? Astounding!" exclaimed John McFarland. Mrs. McFarland asked what the general was like, whether he left an impression. "Oh, why yes he did," I said. "He had very little to say, but was so powerful he could intimidate a man nearly to death with one look," I said, adding, "Good thing he thought I was just a boy." "I hope you like strawberries, Mr. Logan. I had Savannah make a strawberry cheesecake for dessert," said the hospitable Mrs. McFarland. "I have had cake before," I said, "and I liked it. I also had cheese before and I liked it. But both together, to be honest, that does not sound that appetizing." Once again, everyone chuckled. "It's an ancient Roman dish," said John McFarland, "with our southern twist. I discovered it when I was traveling in Italy, and, of course, I had to acquire the recipe and make it a gift to my beloved wife." Mrs. McFarland ignored her husband and reached over, gently tapping my arm. "Rest assured you will love the cake," she said. "It embodies all the wonderful flavors of summer in a sweet dessert. It is one of my favorite treats." She was right. I did love it. The white creamy cake with freshly cut strawberries on top made it a most enjoyable combination. Never in my life had I been so satisfied by a meal as I was that night. After dinner, John McFarland made the suggestion for music, and Miss Elizabeth dutifully rose from her seat and approached the harp. She glided her hand gently over all the strings from one end of the harp to the other. Elizabeth then paused, her eyes closed, her head slightly tilted toward the instrument. Her body was motionless as she listened intently to the sound of the strings, ringing there in gentle harmony, echoing through the room. As the harp slowly came to silence, she began to play. Her music opened the doors to my heart that I thought were locked away. I thought of my mother, whom I never had the chance to meet. Overwhelmed with such doleful longing, my body had no choice but to surrender unconditionally to the beautiful sounds tinkling from the instrument. I fought back tears. Her hands seemed weightless, slowly rolling back and forth over the harp strings. I fell into a hypnotic state. As the song slowly plucked its way to the end, I thought of Augustus McFarlane's dismissal of Elizabeth's playing as uninspiring noise. For me, it was essentially a key that had unlocked my soul. Miss Elizabeth rose and gave an elegant curtsy and a shy, girlish laugh at the small round of applause she was given. "What did you think of the harp now?" Augustus asked me. I paused, trying to conceal the real feelings that had been awakened, and calmly said, "It exceeded all my expectations. Up until now, I was unaware that there was an instrument so powerful. It was like the warmth from a fire on a cold Canadian winter night." Miss Elizabeth instantly brightened from my comments. Augustus McFarlane shook his head and said, "Logan, there is no need to exaggerate and get sentimental. Why, we haven't even had a nightcap yet." "I did not exaggerate," I said. "I feel quite moved by it." Again, this pleased Elizabeth immensely. "What was the piece called?" asked William. "The Last Rose of Summer. It was a poem by Thomas Moore, one of my favorites to play." Augustus McFarlane's face made a sarcastic scowl. "It may be fun for you to play, my dear, but it sounds quite miserable and sobering for my taste. For you, however, I would endure it." Elizabeth was clearly hurt by this, and the room grew quiet for a moment, broken only by an invitation to enjoy a nightcap of drambuie and cigars in the parlor as the ladies retired for the evening. The men then proceeded to leave the table and say good night to Mrs. Elizabeth and Mrs. McFarland. I would have rather stayed, knowing that my feelings for her, an engaged woman, would be not only inappropriate but hopelessly unrequited. I settled for less. I said to her, "Good evening, Miss Elizabeth. Thank you for playing the harp so beautifully. The moment will always stay with me." "It was my pleasure," was her simple reply. I looked upon her one last time for the night. Her perfect lips expressed a gentle pink smile that exuded kindness. Above her upper lip was a small freckle adorning the top of one of two soft peaks. My romantic feelings were certain. A fire had been ignited. I longed to touch and kiss those lips then and there, to remain with her rather than following the men into the parlor. Next to the grand fireplace, oak paneling, and world trophies in the parlor, we sipped away our drambuie and puffed away large cigars made from tobacco from the local McFarland farm and spent the rest of the evening in pointless political banter. Before we retired for the night, Augustus invited me on a tour of his plantation the next day. That night, I lay in the sumptuous bedroom, warm and comfortable, staring at the ceiling and thinking of Elizabeth.